The Central Park Mystery, 11 Disappearances, the dark truth that emerged after 25 years. 11 people vanished in Central Park in 1998. The dark truth comes to light. 25 years later. Narrated by Marcus Thompson, investigative journalist. My name is Marcus Thompson, and for 25 years I've carried an obsession that has defined my career and in many ways my life. In 1998, I was just a young reporter at the New York Times, assigned to cover what initially seemed like just another missing persons case. I could never have imagined I was about to dive into the greatest criminal mystery in modern New York history, a mystery that would consume me for over 2 decades until, at last, the truth emerged from the shadows of Central Park. The morning that changed everything. It was Tuesday, September 15, 1998, a cold and foggy morning in Manhattan. The temperature was 64 degrees, 18 degrees C, and a thick mist hung over Central Park like a gray shroud. I didn't know it yet, but I was documenting the final moments of peace before 11 lives were swallowed by unimaginable darkness. At 6:30 a.m., as had happened every day for 139 years since its opening, the wrought iron gates of Central Park opened to greet New Yorkers in their morning quest for calm. Among the first visitors was Sarah Chen, a 28-year-old nurse from Mount Sinai Hospital. Sarah was a creature of rigid habit. Every single day without exception she passed by Bethesda Fountain at exactly 7:02 a.m. You could set your watch by her. Just a few steps behind Sarah on the same East Drive path was Robert Martinez, a meticulous 45-year-old accountant, walking with his 7-year-old golden retriever, Max. Robert had been a widower for 2 years. His wife Elena lost her battle with breast cancer in 1996. Since then, Max was more than a pet. He was Robert's best friend, confidant, and emotional anchor in a world that had become too dark to face alone. Elsewhere in the park near Bethesda Fountain, Margaret Sullivan, a graceful 67-year-old woman, carefully opened her brown leather purse to retrieve a bag of corn. Margaret volunteered at a nursing home on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but her mornings in the park were sacred, a ritual of communion with nature that prepared her to care for those who needed it most. At the playground near the Alice in Wonderland statue, 34-year-old history teacher Tom Bradley pushed his 8-year-old son Kevin on the swings. Tom was a single father since his ex-wife had moved to California 2 years earlier, and these morning moments with Kevin were the most precious part of his life. The boy loved hearing stories his father told about the Lenape Indians who lived in the area long before the park existed. In Sheep Meadow, 22-year-old NYU art student Jennifer Walsh set up her portable easel. Jennifer was obsessed with the unique quality of morning light. She had written in her journal, "The morning light has a nearly magical quality, as if the world is reborn with every sunrise." Her drawings of Central Park were poetic captures of fleeting moments. Near Bow Bridge, 52-year-old freelance photographer David Kim meticulously adjusted the lenses on his Nikon cameras. David had a gift for finding beauty in the simplest moments. His Central Park photos weren't just images. They were visual stories that touched the soul. Maria Santos, 41, pushed her cleaning cart along Literary Walk. She had emigrated from El Salvador in 1990, fleeing the civil war that ravaged her home country. Maria didn't just clean the park. She tended it like her own garden, treating every leaf and path with love and care. In the quietest corner of the park, near the conservatory garden, Dr. William Hayes, a renowned 59-year-old psychiatrist, walked hand in hand with his wife Eleanor, 56. They represented everything good about marriage, his clinical wisdom balanced by her artistic creativity, complementing each other after 32 years together. What none of these people knew that seemingly normal September morning was that they were living their final hours of freedom. Somewhere in the shadows of Central Park, a malevolent presence watched, planned, and waited for the perfect moment to activate a scheme meticulously prepared over many years. At 10:15 a.m. that morning, calm would be shattered forever. Due to the size of your text, well over 10,000 words, translating it in full in one go isn't supported in a single message. If you'd like, I can. 1. Continue the translation in sequenced parts. Just say continue and I'll pick up where I left off. 2. Export this full translation into a downloadable document, e.g., Word or PDF format. 3. Summarize the full story in English with all key plot points. The alarm was raised. The first call came into the 911 emergency center at 11:30 a.m. Linda Chen, Sarah's sister, called with a concern that, in hindsight, was prophetic. Her voice trembled as she explained that Sarah always called after her morning run, but that day, the phone remained silent. For anyone who knew Sarah, this wasn't just unusual. It was impossible. At 12:45 p.m., Carmen Martinez made her desperate call. Her husband Robert had left to walk Max at 6:45 a.m. and hadn't returned. Robert would never leave his twin children waiting. He was far too devoted a father for that. The desperation in her voice was palpable, as if she already sensed something terrible had happened. At 1:20 p.m., Kevin Bradley's school called his mother in California to report the boy's absence. Tom Bradley never, ever missed the ritual of taking his son to school. It was sacred to a father who had already lost so much time with his son due to the divorce. At 1:45 p.m., an NYU professor noticed Jennifer Walsh's absence. Jennifer never skipped class. She was obsessively dedicated to her art studies. When her roommates confirmed she hadn't returned to the dorm, a pattern began to emerge. At 2:15 p.m., the editorial office of a photography magazine called Looking for David Kim, who had missed an important meeting. David was too professionally reliable to simply not show up. At 2:30 p.m., the park's cleaning supervisor, Carlos Mendoza, reported that Maria Santos had abandoned her cleaning cart on Literary Walk. For anyone who knew Maria, that was unthinkable. She was meticulously organized with every tool in its specific place. At 6:30 p.m., Dr. Patricia Coleman, a colleague of Dr. Hayes, called in concern after William and Eleanor failed to show for a long-planned dinner. William was extremely punctual, and if something had come up, he would have called. The investigation begins when I was assigned to cover the story at 3:00 p.m. that Tuesday. I believed I was dealing with a series of bizarre coincidences. 5 disappearances in the same location on the same morning? It seemed statistically impossible, but NYPD Sergeant Mike O'Connor was unequivocal. This is no coincidence. The first search team entered Central Park at 2:30 p.m. They began in the areas where each person had last been seen, expanding the search radius systematically. At 3:45 p.m., they found Jennifer Walsh's art supplies scattered beneath a tree. Her pencils were broken, and her paper was crumpled, as if she had suddenly fled in terror. At 4:20 p.m., David Kim's professional cameras were discovered near Bow Bridge. The lenses were intact, but the film was partially exposed, as if he had been interrupted mid-shoot. At 5:00 p.m., they made a discovery that sent a chill down my spine. Maria Santos's cleaning cart stood abandoned on Literary Walk, her tools scattered as though she had been ripped away in the middle of her work. By the end of that first day, we had 9 adults, 1 child, and a dog missing without a single explainable trace. Authorities and the technology of 1998. On the morning of September 16th, as the case gained national attention, federal authorities were called in. Special Agent Lisa Chen, no relation to Sarah, took over the federal coordination of the case. In her words, recorded in my first interview with her, "In 15 years investigating disappearances, I've never seen anything remotely like this. The first significant breakthrough came through analysis of security cameras. The 1998 system was primitive by today's standards, but it still captured data that defied all logic. The camera at Engineers Gate showed Sarah Chen entering the park at 6:47 a.m. At 7:02 a.m., she appeared near Bethesda Fountain, exactly on her habitual schedule. Then, inexplicably, she simply vanished. The next camera on her usual route never captured her passing. The same pattern repeated for every victim. Robert and Max were seen at 7:15 a.m. walking along Literary Walk. The last image showed them heading toward Sheep Meadow. They never emerged on the other side. Tom and Kevin were seen playing at the playground at 8:30 a.m. At 9:45 a.m., they were walking toward the conservatory garden. After that, nothing. At no point did the cameras capture signs of a struggle, panic, or even concern. It was as if an invisible black hole had appeared in Central Park, sucking people into an unknown dimension. The largest search in history. Within 48 hours, it became the largest search operation in modern New York history. Over 200 police officers, 50 federal agents, 30 search dogs, and 12 helicopters were mobilized. Commander Robert Stevens treated it as a potential terrorist attack. The ability to abduct 11 people simultaneously suggested a level of organization that could pose a national security threat. The most disturbing element was the behavior of the search dogs. Patricia Mills, a rescue dog expert with 15 years of experience, told me something that still haunts me. It was like they were teleported. The dogs got confused, circling the exact points where the scent trail ended, sniffing the air as if they were expecting the people to magically reappear. During the first 3 weeks, over 200 sightings were reported per day. Sarah was seen simultaneously in Seattle, Los Angeles, Miami, Denver, and Chicago. Robert was spotted with Max in at least 20 different states. Every call was a dagger to the hearts of the families who clung to any sliver of hope. Theories and speculations. The media went wild. Headlines became increasingly sensational. Dimensional portal in Central Park. The Manhattan-Bermuda Triangle. 11 people sucked into another dimension. As a responsible journalist, I resisted these fantastical theories. But I admit, even my rational mind began to question the laws of physics. Agent Marcus Wright investigated links to cartels, terrorist organizations, and extremist religious cults. The level of coordination required suggested significant resources and long-term planning, but every lead led to a dead end. In 2003, the families hired Richard Stone, a private investigator with an impeccable reputation. Stone spent 5 years reinvestigating every detail, every lead, every theory. He uncovered inconsistencies in the original investigation that deeply intrigued me, but nothing that changed the fundamental fact. 11 people had disappeared without any explainable trace. Stone's most disturbing discovery was the existence of an additional security camera that had never been properly reviewed. When he finally gained access to the footage, it had been accidentally erased. That revelation planted the first seeds of suspicion of a possible cover-up. Years of agony. As a journalist, I witnessed the psychological devastation this mystery caused to the families. Dr. Melissa Carter, a trauma psychologist, explained to me that they were suffering from ambiguous loss, a particularly cruel form of grief because the mind cannot fully process the loss without definitive evidence of death. Linda Chen developed severe chronic insomnia. Carmen Martinez was hospitalized 3 times for panic attacks. Kevin Bradley's mother, Rebecca, moved back to New York from California, unable to live with the uncertainty surrounding her son's fate. Every September 15th, family and friends gathered in Central Park for a vigil. The first vigils were massive, with hundreds holding candles and photographs. As the years passed, the numbers dwindled to a determined few who refused to forget. I attended all 25 vigils, documenting the evolution of grief and hope. My personal obsession. I admit this case became more than a story to me. It became a personal mission. I spent countless nights walking through Central Park, trying to understand how 11 people could simply vanish. I studied every inch of the park, every service tunnel, every historical structure. In 2005, I began investigating New York's underground history. I discovered a fascinating network of abandoned tunnels, forgotten subway stations, and underground structures dating back to the 19th century. But nothing explained the disappearances. In 2010, I convinced my editor at the Times to approve a 6-month investigation dedicated solely to the case. I interviewed over 200 people, reviewed thousands of documents, and even hired a ground-penetrating radar, GPR, specialist to scan suspicious areas of the park. We found some interesting anomalies, but nothing conclusive. The Internet and conspiracy theories. With the rise of the Internet, the case found new life online. Entire forums were dedicated to theories about the disappearances. Some claimed secret government experiments involving mind control. Others suggested dimensional portals or alien abductions. There were even theories about modern-day vampires operating beneath Manhattan. Dr. James Wright, a sociology professor at NYU, explained to me, when reality is unexplainable, the human mind creates fantastical explanations. It's a psychological defense mechanism against the incomprehensible. I resisted these theories, staying grounded in fact-based journalism. But I confess that, in the loneliest nights of my investigation, even I considered possibilities that defied reason. New technological developments in 2015. With technology advancing, I requested permission to apply new investigative methods to the case. Drones with high-resolution cameras, advanced thermal scanners, and pattern analysis software were deployed to re-examine Central Park. We discovered several underground thermal anomalies, areas where the ground temperature was consistently different than expected. but the city refused to authorize excavation, citing historical preservation concerns and potential disruption to wildlife. In 2018, I gained access to AI-based video analysis tools to re-examine the original 1998 security footage. The AI detected subtle patterns human investigators had missed: micro-facial expressions, body language shifts, and even anomalous shadows, suggesting the presence of other individuals just outside the camera's frame. The accidental discovery. In March 2023, after 25 years of persistence, I finally got a breakthrough, though not in the way I had imagined. During routine renovations to Central Park's drainage systems, workers made a discovery that changed everything. Construction worker Miguel Santos told me, "We were digging about 10 feet down when my shovel hit something hard. It wasn't natural stone. It was clearly man-made." What they found was a complex underground structure that had remained hidden for decades. A network of tunnels and chambers built long before the disappearances, with architectural sophistication indicating substantial investment and long-term planning. The underground complex. When I finally gained access to the site, using my 25 years of connections in law enforcement and city government, I was stunned by what I saw. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the forensic archaeologist leading the excavation, told me, "The structure is incredibly complex. Multiple levels, advanced ventilation systems, even electrical wiring installed decades ago. The complex spanned more than 2 square kilometers beneath different sections of the park. More disturbingly, the entrances were strategically positioned at the exact locations where the victims were last seen. This could not be a coincidence. The level of planning was terrifying. Someone had studied the victims' movement patterns for months, possibly years, before taking action. Sarah passed through the same spot every day at the same time. Robert followed the same path. Tom and Kevin always played in the same area. The perpetrator knew their routines better than they did." The final evidence. On the deepest level of the complex, investigators made the discovery I had both feared and hoped for over the last 25 years. Definitive evidence of the fate of the 11 victims. Out of respect for the families and due to legal limitations, I cannot describe the specific details of what was found, but I can confirm that all 11 victims were located, and their families finally received the answers they had been seeking for a quarter of a century. Forensic analysis revealed a disturbing timeline. The victims had been kept alive for varying periods, some for weeks, others for months. The suffering was prolonged and systematic, yet it also revealed something that brought a measure of comfort to the families. They had resisted bravely, cared for one another, and maintained their human dignity until the very end. The investigation revealed that the underground complex had been built by Dr. Marcus Thornfield, a brilliant but deeply disturbed psychiatrist who mysteriously disappeared in 1999, 1 year after the abductions. Dr. Patricia Coleman, who had once worked alongside Thornfield, was stunned when the truth came to light. Marcus was brilliant, but there was something dark about him. He was obsessed with extreme psychological experiments, theories on forced behavioral modification. Thornfield's journals, discovered within the complex, outlined a meticulous plan to create what he called the ultimate social experiment. He intended to study how individuals would react to total isolation and absolute control. His notes showed he believed he could reprogram human personalities through controlled trauma. It was sadistic pseudoscience disguised as legitimate research. Thornfield had violated every imaginable ethical code, treating human beings as lab rats in experiments that challenged the very definition of humanity. The conspiracy network. Thornfield did not act alone. That much had been clear since the earliest days of the investigation. The scale of the operation required multiple accomplices and substantial resources. The 2023 investigation unearthed a network of at least 6 collaborators: corrupt security guards, bribed park employees, and even a police officer who helped cover up evidence. This was a conspiracy that lasted decades. They had people in key positions to ensure that certain pieces of evidence were never found, certain leads were never followed properly. The tapes that Richard Stone discovered had been accidentally erased in 2003. Not an accident. Deliberate sabotage. My journalistic investigation from 2023 to 2024 revealed at least 12 instances where evidence was suppressed, witnesses were discouraged from speaking, and leads were intentionally ignored. Internal police emails I obtained through Freedom of Information Act, FOIA requests, showed that some investigators suspected the truth as early as 1999, but were silenced by superiors who had connections to Thornfield. Delayed justice. Of the 6 identified accomplices, 3 were still alive when the truth emerged in 2023. In December of that year, they were arrested and charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder. The trial, which I covered daily as a journalist, was a mix of justice and tragedy. Seeing the perpetrators finally held accountable brought some measure of closure, but nothing could return 25 stolen years to the devastated families. Linda Chen, Sarah's sister, told me after the verdict, 26 years. That's how long it took to get justice for Sarah. But every day was worth the fight. No family should ever go through what we did. The lasting impact. This case fundamentally changed how law enforcement approaches missing persons investigations. The Chen-Martinez Protocol, named after the first reported victims, is now taught in police academies across the country. It requires that multiple disappearances in a nearby area be treated as potentially connected within the first 4 hours. The 2024 Missing Persons Protection Act was directly inspired by this case. It guarantees immediate federal resources for multiple disappearance investigations and creates an interconnected national database that could have identified the patterns much earlier. Personal transformation of the families. For the surviving families, having answers allowed for a healing process that had been impossible for decades. Carmen Martinez told me, knowing that Robert and Max were together until the end gives me a small comfort. They loved each other so much, at least they weren't alone. Carmen found love again in 2021, marrying Miguel, a man who had lost his own wife under mysterious circumstances. They met in a support group for families of the missing and built a new family based on mutual understanding of loss. Kevin Bradley, now 33, named his first daughter Sarah Thomas Bradley, Sarah after the first reported victim, and Thomas after his father. He told me, she will never meet her grandfather, but she will grow up knowing about the brave man he was. Future prevention. This case led to significant advances in the early detection of psychopathic behavior in mental health professionals. Dr. Alan Cooper, a criminologist who extensively studied Thornfield's profile, developed more rigorous psychological assessments and continuous supervision systems. An AI system was created to monitor suspicious behavioral patterns, unauthorized constructions, unusual equipment purchases, sudden changes in professional behavior. It is our attempt to prevent future Thornfields. Educational legacy. The Central Park 11 case is now studied in criminology, psychology, and law enforcement curricula in universities around the world. It demonstrates how investigative bias and corruption can allow monsters to operate freely for decades. The most important lesson that emerged from these 25 years of investigation is to never assume that impossible crimes are truly impossible. Reality sometimes surpasses our imagination in its cruelty, but also in our capacity to discover the truth when we refuse to give up. The park's healing Central Park, once the stage of so much suffering, has gradually healed. The trees grew, new generations of visitors brought life and joy, and nature reclaimed the spaces that had been desecrated. In September 2024, a memorial was inaugurated near Bethesda Fountain. 11 cherry trees were planted, 1 for each victim. Every September 15th, a memorial ceremony is held. It is no longer about inconsolable grief, but about celebrating lives that deeply impacted everyone who knew them. The cherry trees bloom every spring, reminding us that from the deepest tragedy, new life and renewed hope can emerge. Final reflections. After 25 years investigating this case, I learned that human capacity for both evil and resilience knows no limits. Thornfield represents the worst of human nature, a man who used his intelligence and education to cause unimaginable suffering. But the families who survived represent the best of us, people who refused to give up the search for truth, even when that truth seemed unreachable. Sarah Chen saving lives in the hospital every day. Robert Martinez being a devoted father while fighting his own grief. Margaret Sullivan feeding ducks and caring for the elderly. Tom Bradley sharing his passion for history with his son. Jennifer Walsh creating art that captured the beauty of the world. David Kim photographing moments that touched the soul. Maria Santos caring for the park as if it were her own garden. Dr. William and Eleanor Hayes loving each other deeply after decades together. These were ordinary people living extraordinary lives through small daily acts of kindness and meaning. Their memory reminds us of what truly matters in human life. A lesson of hope. The sun has risen over Central Park more than 9,000 times since that terrible September morning in 1998. Each sunrise brought new hope for the families who refused to give up the search for truth. As a journalist who dedicated a quarter of a century to this case, I can say with certainty that the truth, however painful, always brought liberation. The families were finally able to bury their dead, process their grief, and begin to rebuild their lives on foundations of answers rather than endless questions. Today, Central Park pulses again with life. Runners follow paths similar to Sarah's. Families walk their dogs like Robert and Max once did. Artists capture beauty as Jennifer and David once did. Life continues, enriched by the memory of those we lost. The memorial plaque sums up all that needs to be said. In memory of Sarah Chen, Robert Martinez, Max, Margaret Sullivan, Tom Bradley, Kevin Bradley, Jennifer Walsh, David Kim, Maria Santos, Dr. William Hayes, and Eleanor Hayes. Their lives were tragically cut short, but their legacy of kindness, art, compassion, and love endures forever. Never forgotten, always loved. The mystery of the Central Park 11 has finally been solved, but its true lesson transcends the crime itself. It reminds us that even in the deepest darkness of human evil, the light of love, memory, and relentless pursuit of truth can never be completely extinguished. Justice may come late, but when it comes, it shines with the strength of 1,000 suns rising over a new day full of possibilities. As a journalist, as a human being, as someone who never stopped believing that the truth matters, I can say it was worth every sleepless night, every lead followed, every tear shed with the families who entrusted me with their stories. If you learn anything from my 25-year journey investigating this case, let it be this: never underestimate the power of persistence. Never accept that some questions cannot be answered. And never ever give up on the missing, because somewhere, somehow, their stories are waiting to be told. The details that changed everything. Throughout all these years, it was the small details that eventually led to the resolution of the case. Details that seemed insignificant at the time, but that proved crucial once we finally had the full context. The quality of the metal found in the underground complex, for example, revealed that construction had begun in the early 1990s, almost a decade before the disappearances. This indicated a level of premeditation I initially refused to believe was possible. The electrical systems in the complex used components only available through specialized industrial suppliers. By tracking these purchases through decades of records, we were able to establish a direct line of connection to shell companies controlled by Thornfield. Even more disturbing was the discovery that Thornfield had meticulously studied the routines of his future victims for more than 2 years before acting. Documents found in the complex included detailed schedules, secretly taken photographs, and even superficial psychological analyses of each individual. Sarah Chen was chosen because her routine was absolutely predictable. Robert Martinez because his emotional isolation after his wife's death made him vulnerable. Tom and Kevin Bradley because they represented a father-son dynamic Thornfield wanted to study under extreme stress. The predator's psychology. After years studying Thornfield's writings, I began to understand the disturbed mind behind these crimes. Dr. Rachel Torres, a forensic psychologist who extensively analyzed the perpetrator's journals, explained to me, Thornfield did not see his victims as human beings. He saw them as specimens in a perverse scientific experiment. His notes revealed an obsession with what he called the limits of human adaptability. He believed he could discover people's psychological breaking points through systematic isolation and controlled environmental manipulation. Most shocking of all was discovering that Thornfield meticulously documented his observations of the victims. Pages and pages of cold clinical notes describing emotional reactions, behavioral patterns, and escape attempts as if he were studying lab rats. But the journals also revealed something that brought some comfort to the families. The victims never completely surrendered. They formed a community in captivity, cared for one another, and maintained their human dignity even under the most extreme circumstances. The escape attempts, one of the most moving discoveries, was the evidence of multiple coordinated escape attempts. The victims not only survived, they actively resisted. Tom Bradley, using his knowledge of history, identified structural weak points in the complex based on 19th century construction techniques. Jennifer Walsh used her artistic skills to create detailed maps of the underground maze. David Kim discovered how to sabotage the electrical system. Dr. Hayes, with his psychiatric expertise, developed strategies to keep everyone mentally stable and focused on survival. Maria Santos, with her experience in the Salvadoran Civil War, became a natural leader in organizing resistance. Their escape attempts failed not due to lack of courage or intelligence, but because Thornfield's security system was more sophisticated than they could have imagined. But the fact that they never stopped trying brought immense pride to the surviving families. The fate of Thornfield. One question haunted me for years. What happened to Marcus Thornfield himself? His disappearance in 1999 always seemed far too suspicious to be a coincidence. The 2023 investigation finally revealed the truth. Thornfield did not disappear voluntarily. He was murdered by one of his own accomplices who suffered a late crisis of conscience. Thornfield's body was found in a sealed section of the complex, along with evidence of a violent confrontation. James Morrison, the corrupt former police officer who had helped cover up evidence, confessed during the trials that he killed Thornfield in December 1999. Morrison claimed he could no longer live with the weight of what they had done, and that Thornfield refused to stop the experiments even after the victims' deaths. It is a dark irony that the mastermind behind the crimes met his end at the hands of someone he himself had corrupted. Impact on the scientific community. The case sent shockwaves through the psychiatric and research communities. How could someone with impeccable academic credentials stray so drastically from basic ethical principles without anyone noticing? A separate investigation revealed that Thornfield had forged ethics committee approvals for several of his earlier studies. He had created false documents, used fictitious identities, and even established shell research organizations to lend legitimacy to his work. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, who chaired a government commission on research ethics after the case, implemented new oversight protocols that are now international standards. The Thornfield case showed us that professional trust, without proper verification, can be a weapon in the wrong hands. Recovery and reconstruction. Following the family's healing journey over 25 years was one of the most profoundly human experiences of my career. Each family dealt with loss differently, but all showed a resilience that continues to inspire me. Linda Chen channeled her pain into activism, founding a nonprofit that supports families of missing persons. She told me, "Sarah always wanted to save lives. Through this organization, she continues saving lives even after death." Carmen Martinez became a trauma counselor, helping others navigate ambiguous loss. Robert taught me about unconditional love. Now I use that lesson to help others find hope in the darkness. Kevin Bradley followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a history teacher. He created a special curriculum on human resilience in the face of tragedy. My father taught me that history isn't just about the past, it's about how the past prepares us to build a better future. Modern technology and prevention. One question I am often asked is, could this happen today? The answer is complex. On one hand, our surveillance technology is infinitely more advanced than in 1998. Central Park now has hundreds of high-definition cameras, underground motion sensors, and rapid response systems. On the other hand, our technology also offers new tools for sophisticated predators. Digital surveillance, data manipulation, and even artificial intelligence can be used both to protect and to exploit. Dr. Michael Chen, no relation to Sarah, an urban security expert I consulted in 2024, explained, "The lesson of the Thornfield case is not that we need more technology. It's that we need more humanity. People paying attention to one another, communities that care, and systems that don't let anyone disappear without immediate investigation." Reflections on journalism. This case fundamentally changed my approach to investigative journalism. I learned that some stories cannot be told in a 24-hour news cycle or even in a few months. Some truths require decades of patient persistence. I also learned about the weight of responsibility. When families entrust you with their most painful stories, when they depend on your work to find answers, journalism stops being just a career and becomes a moral mission. There were moments when I wanted to give up, times when it seemed the truth was permanently buried under layers of conspiracy and time. But every time I considered abandoning the case, I thought of Linda Chen waiting for news of Sarah, or Carmen Martinez wondering what happened to Robert and Max. The power of memory. One of the most touching discoveries during the excavation of the complex was a set of letters the victims had written to their families. They were never sent, of course, but served as a way to maintain emotional connections with the outside world. Sarah's letter to Linda read simply, "Little sister, if you are reading this, it means our story can finally have an ending. Thank you for never stopping your search for me." Robert had written to Carmen, "My love, I took care of Max until the end. We thought of you and the children every day. Be happy. That is what I want most in the world." Tom had written to Rebecca in California, "I took care of Kevin the best I could. He was brave and strong. Teach our daughter about the brother she never met." These letters were delivered to the families during private ceremonies in 2024. Seeing the impact they caused, the mixture of renewed pain and closure, reminded me why this story needed to be fully told. Justice versus vengeance. During the trials of the surviving accomplices, I witnessed something profound about human nature. The victims' families, who had every right to seek vengeance, instead pursued justice with a dignity that humbled me. Linda Chen testified, "We don't want more families to go through what we went through. We want the system fixed so this never happens again." Carmen Martinez said to the court, "My husband believed in people's goodness. Even after all that happened, I choose to believe in it too. They could have demanded the death penalty or life imprisonment without parole. Instead, they asked for systemic reforms, better police training and resources for other families of the missing. Their grace in the face of unimaginable evil was one of the most powerful lessons I learned in 25 years of journalism." International legacy. The Central Park 11 case inspired changes not only in the United States but internationally. Interpol created new protocols for multiple disappearance cases. The European Union implemented rapid alert systems based on the lessons learned. The Chen-Martinez protocol was adapted by police forces in more than 30 countries. Universities around the world now teach this case as an example of both what can go wrong and what can go right when communities refuse to give up the search for truth. Dr. François Dubois from the Sorbonne wrote to me, "Your journalistic work on this case demonstrates the power of persistent investigation in the face of seemingly insurmountable injustice. It is an inspiration to investigative journalists worldwide." The next generation. One of the most hopeful things I observed over the years was how the next generation engaged with this story. College students wrote dissertations about the case. Young journalists reached out to me to learn about long-term investigation. In 2023, a group of students from Columbia Journalism School created an investigative podcast on unsolved cases, directly inspired by my work on the Central Park disappearances. They invited me as a consultant, and it was rewarding to see a new generation embrace the principles of responsible and persistent journalism. These young journalists not only documented the final resolution of the case, but also began investigating other long-standing mysteries with the same patient and meticulous methodology. Final reflections on human nature. After spending 25 years immersed in this story, speaking with victims, perpetrators, investigators, families, and experts, I reached some profound conclusions about human nature. First, true evil exists. It is not just ignorance, poor education, or difficult circumstances. Marcus Thornfield had every opportunity and education in the world, and still chose to cause unimaginable suffering. Some people simply choose darkness. Second, good also exists, and it is more powerful than evil. The families who never stopped searching, the investigators who worked beyond the call of duty, the journalists like me who refused to let the story die. Together, we eventually won. Third, truth carries its own weight. It can be buried, obscured, denied, but it can never be completely destroyed. Eventually, it finds a way into the light. A message for the future. If you are reading this in the future, 10, 20, or 50 years from now, and you come across a mystery that seems impossible to solve, remember this story. Remember that 11 people disappeared without a trace and that it took 25 years for us to discover the truth. But we did discover it. Never accept that some questions cannot be answered. Never believe that some crimes are too sophisticated to be solved. And never ever underestimate the power of persistence combined with journalistic integrity. To the families of currently missing persons who may read this, your pain is real, your search is noble, and you are not alone. Keep asking questions. Keep demanding answers. Keep believing that the truth matters. To the perpetrators of unsolved crimes who may read this, know that it is never too late for justice. Technology advances, investigative methods improve, and there is always someone, an investigator, a journalist, a family member, who refuses to give up. The story of the Central Park 11 ended with justice and closure after 25 years. Not because it was easy, but because the right people refused to stop searching for answers. This is the final lesson of my quarter-century journey. In a world that sometimes seems dominated by darkness, never underestimate the power of a single person with a just mission who refuses to quit. Truth always prevails. Sometimes it takes 25 years, but it always prevails. Marcus Thompson, New York, 2024.